Hello and welcome to another Hashtag Facts Matter podcast. I'm Guy Gordon, where we will once again dive into the issue of a constitutional convention in Michigan. On November 3rd, you will be asked if we should undertake such an exercise. Today, we focus on Article IX, finance and taxation, and are there two bigger, thornier issues in state government than those? I'm joined by Eric Lupher, president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan and our in-house constitutional authority on this. I mean, if ever there was an epicenter for controversial earthquakes over the last 50 years, it's been this, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Article I, that is our Declaration of Rights, and Article IX, that is our finance and taxation provisions, are the meatiest of the meaty as we look at the different articles and what's working and not working. How does it affect citizens? How does it affect state and local government?
It feels like for the past 60 years or so, we've been having an ongoing constitutional convention as it relates to Article 9 anyway, just because of all the attempts to amend it.
It has been the article for which there's been the most attempts to amend it, and has also had the most success. And again, there's amendments to Article I that have been very significant, the reproductive rights and issues like that, very important to people. But the amendments to Article IX, limiting how our state and local government can raise and use revenue, have been very consequential. You would have to rank those up as peers of those in terms of consequentiality.
When you think about it, I mean, the Headley Amendment and Proposal A in 1994 would be the two biggies. And what you and I have discussed in previous podcasts is that so much of this is done within the constitutional context because people have really lost faith in the legislature to rein themselves in or to be able to get past their spending and taxation habit.
Yeah, I think Article 9 is the poster child for how citizens have distrusted their elected officials that they choose, but distrust them to do the things that are in the citizens' best interest. So where in a perfect world, we might call our legislator and say, this is what I feel. In a less perfect world, we might initiate a statutory referendum to say, let's do it this way. We've sort of ended up in the third least favorable choice, where people have chose to amend the Constitution that is the hardest to change and the most secure, right? You can't tinker around the edges once those words are embedded into the Constitution.
Well, and in previous incarnations of the Constitution, and especially at the 1961 Con, I mean, this was the fundamental debate. How far do we go to protect the power of the purse for the legislature? And will that likely be ground zero for the same debate if we had a Con this time around?
For sure. This will be, I think a lot of people, should they choose to campaign and run for delegates, will have the desire to serve on the Finance and Taxation Committee and have a voice in what this looks like with a draft document.
And I mean, it's fundamental because this is a critical check on the executive branch.
Both executive and legislative, yes.
Yeah. So if we were to look at some of the thornier issues that they might want to pick up, especially as it relates to taxation, let's start with Section 7, that it at least in theory requires a flat income tax rate, and then it sort of prohibits a graduated tax base, but that's somewhat ambiguous.
It is a bit. But again, other states, different states have different income tax systems. We have been doing this every 16 years, trying to help people understand this question of a constitutional convention. And when we look back 16 years and say, well, how many states have a flat rate versus a graduated rate, it has changed over time, really speaking to the idea that this is a legislative matter that most other states have the legislatures have the freedom to say, we're meeting our revenue needs, we're not meeting our revenue needs. We care about the regressivity or progressivity of our income tax, and we want to make these changes accordingly. In Michigan, our legislature and our cities, who also have the authority to levy city income taxes, are restricted. They only have this choice.
You point out in your paper, and we invite everybody to find it at crcmich.org, that in theory we have this flat tax rate. And yes, when you pay your taxes, you know what your tax rate is. But through exemptions, waivers, exclusions, credits, do we really have a flat tax rate, or is it graduated in a sense just by determining what level of your income is subject to it?
Yeah, there is some progressivity to our income tax. The courts have been asked to weigh in on that, and they've more or less signed off on it. It starts with the fact that we begin with the federal adjusted gross income,
right?
And that's the most that's the simplest way to start defining your tax base for each individual filing this. You don't have to start over from what you've just done with the federal tax filing. You can just pick up that number and plug it in here, and then there's some extra credits and deductions as you suggest. So it's a balance of simplicity versus purity, but our other states are far more progressive because they have those graduated rates.
Right. But that might be fertile ground for discussion, just how much we want to muddy up the code with these exemptions, credits, things like that.
Yeah, I think should we have a constitutional convention, the question is whether we should have this prohibition or not. And if the decision's to keep it, it's not that we should change it in some way and start putting tax graduated tiers into our Constitution. That's way too far. It's simply, should we in the Constitution tie the hands of the legislature and require require a flat rate tax versus a graduated tax?
In terms of sales taxes, which are by nature regressive, would there be a revisiting on limitations on sales taxes, and also perhaps a question about whether or not you would allow some opportunities for local governments to engage?
Yeah, I think there'll be a strong interest, probably a strong lobby by local governments. And in saying that, I'm speaking not only of cities and townships and counties, but also many of the special authorities that look at their peers in other states have the opportunity to levy a local sales tax, and the prohibition exists here in Michigan. So the tax limitations related to sales tax in Michigan, we have a discretionary tax that dates back to the 1940s that say the legislature may levy a sales tax up to a certain rate, but also a mandatory tax that we created in 94 that say the state has to levy 2 cents to fund schools. So a 6% sales tax, and if local governments say, well, we would like that, but there's no room. The state's using all of that 6%. There's also provisions that say of the money collected, so much has to go to schools, so much has to go to local governments and to public transit. So it gets muddied up real quick. And again, it's just a question of, you look at other states, they have the ability to change their sales tax. They have the ability to authorize local sales taxes. They have the ability to decide how that money is used, and they don't have to ask the voters to amend the Constitution to make that happen.
Upon reading your paper, one of the pieces of my ignorance that I didn't realize was that we have a state revenue limit built into the Constitution in Section 26, that our state revenues cannot exceed a certain proportion of our state personal income, and that we've bumped and exceeded that limit on a couple of occasions when things have been going gangbusters, but usually we fall beneath it. Does this kind of fall under the heading of maybe things that have outused their usefulness or that are kind of an anachronism?
Well, yeah, by accident. The revenue limit was created as part of the Headley Amendment, what we call the Headley Amendment in 1978, that was an effort to limit the growth of government. And they chose, for the state government, let's tie how much state revenue can be generated relative to personal income. The idea of the personal income grows over time, and therefore there's room for state revenue to grow over time. What they didn't presuppose was that our personal income would not grow over time, and even worse, that our state revenues, because of the structure of our our tax system, our revenues are bringing in less and less revenue over time. So it's kind of an indictment, first of all, on our economy, and second of all, on our tax system, that we are now 11, close to $12 billion below that revenue limit, which makes it very irrelevant, right? We could almost double the size of our general fund and still be within that revenue limit. So as a taxpayer, you might feel good that that exists. Local governments look at it, and it doesn't mean that they should be getting more money, but it's a benchmark to what they were getting as a percent of state revenues, back in 1978, and thinking about what might have been if our economy would have continued to grow, if our tax system kept pace with the growth of personal income, how much money would be available for state revenue sharing, or funding schools, or operating state government in many ways that we now look about us and say resources are scarce, and therefore we can't do everything we want to do. So it's kind of an irrelevant tax limit, but at the same time, it's because we chose a period of time when our personal income was the highest, and we only know that in retrospect.
And some presumptions that it would always be thus.
Yes.
The other issue that may arise is and we've seen it become just an annual exercise, and that is earmarking. I guess from a constitutional standpoint, it usurps from some of the legislature's appropriation authority because it siphons off revenue and puts it in specific untouchable pots. Again, in many cases, it's born of a mistrust of and having sacred cows protected. Is that one of those cleanup items that a constitutional convention could be very helpful with?
Last time we had a constitutional convention and we ended up drafting what we now call our 1963 Constitution, the earmarking of state revenues were one of the biggest issues that led to a yes vote and people saying we need to clean this up. Upwards of 80% of all state revenues were legislated or were dedicated, were put into those pots before the legislature could even put their hands on it. And so as the legislature was muddling its way through the 1958 recession, it had very little latitude on where to cut or how to move money around to reflect the state's priorities while living within the limitations. So we look today, and our dedicated revenues have not risen to that same level, but we're not far behind. And knock on wood, we haven't had to deal with any recessions for some period of time, but
Right.
we know they happen. They're inevitable. That's part of our economic cycle. And what happens when we have high levels of earmarking? Again, the legislature, we choose to say appropriate money to our highest priorities, and if that can't happen because of Constitution, and we also have statutory earmarks, it really ties their hands and
Right.
puts the state in a bad spot.
Right. That's as you said, it was a big deal in 61. It may be a big deal again. The other one is the ability of government to borrow. Again, we set a fairly high bar, didn't we? And in some cases require voter approval of taking on larger debt obligations. But that can also be highly restrictive, especially in an emergency context, or where you have these large infrastructure projects where you want to get them up and running.
Yeah. So we have different types of borrowing. Usually, like Governor Whitmer has bonded to do some of the road improvements, her whole Fix the Damn Roads effort, because the money to pay for those bonds was kind of come from gas tax revenue and vehicle registration. She didn't need to. The state highway commission didn't need to come to the voters and ask for voter approval. But if there's just a general need to raise money to fund things, and it's going to come out of the general fund or just generally funding it without a dedicated revenue source, then we need voter approval for that. And that's a way of limiting the state from getting in over its head.
Right.
We saw that with Detroit, not too long ago. It happens with governments, and this is a way to tap the brakes a little bit.
Well, it certainly has happened with the federal government. So, I mean, I think the idea is well-founded, and the skepticism and the mistrust may be well-founded as well. But again, it does limit your flexibility.
It does. I think this is one of the things that they might tinker around the edges, but they probably want to keep in a voice of the people for general obligation bonds. That let's make sure that the people, you're checking in with the people. And I don't know that we addressed it in our paper, but that's not uncommon among the states to have some sort of a check-in on something like that.
Right. Through Headley and Proposal A and through a variety of other mechanisms, we have severely limited the ability of local governments to raise revenues beyond property taxes. And we've even put the brakes on how they can levy their property taxes and what assessment authority they can use. So how robust will there be of a drive, and we've already touched on this to some degree at the top, for local governments to weigh in and say, you have to give us more ability to fund our operations?
Yeah, I'm starting to see some messaging from groups that are opposed to this question of a constitutional convention. I'm not seeing any that are for it, but I suppose if there is a group lurking just out of sight, it would be local governments that are so severely restricted by Article IX. The property tax limitations in place to somewhat affect the tax rates that are available to them. It's kind of a paper tiger, but it exists in the Constitution. And then we put in place the tax limitations in the Headley Amendment in 1978 and created a system of taxable value in 1994 that from 1994 to the recession, the Great Recession, we call it, from 2007 to 2009, they kind of worked hand in hand, and local governments didn't like it because they see there was revenue out there they couldn't tap into, but they were working hand in hand. But since that Great Recession, those two tax limitations have a compounding effect. And we can look back now and say, why didn't we take out the old tax limitation when we put in the new one. And it was the idea that you had to get voter approval and dealing with these types of things through amendment. And there are so many provisions in the Constitution in this way that, while well-intentioned, act to restrict the ability of the legislature to create a municipal finance system that reflects what other states do and meets the needs of Michigan in 2026, and restricts the local governments to raise the revenue that they need to fund their operations and fulfill state mandates that are handed down to them, and to maintain the system, the quality of life that we expect. Why would you try to attract families and businesses to the Michigan? It starts with the quality of life in individual communities. So this has far-reaching effects, and local governments are beaten and abused by the provisions in Article 9. And I don't know that they have a campaign to support this, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
Well, and the other argument would be just the level of detail and complexity in these specific sections as it relates to local government, that there really needs to be kind of a cleanup in aisle 5 on just so you can navigate them.
It does. And again, it speaks to the level of detail. In many cases, we put statutory type language into the Constitution that is so fine, but then we maybe find it doesn't work the way we envisioned, or there's some opportunity to do things different. And so cleanup would be very helpful on some of these things.
One other avenue that may be ripe for plowing is state revenue sharing, Eric. We've seen it become so highly politicized and partisan, and really kind of, where sacred cows go to graze.
Yeah, it goes back to the earmarking, right? The local governments have been precluded from levying taxes other than the property tax. We have a city income tax. We have a few things counties are enabled to do. But for the most part, because we have 1,800 plus units of government and such a checkerboard arrangement of our local government, the state has told local governments, you stand by, the state will raise the revenue and share it with local governments, but then over time has reneged on a lot of those promises. And the revenues that are shared through the Constitution are shared on a per capita basis, which back in the 1940s, when this was first introduced, the Citizens Research Council said, this is probably the worst way to do that there are so many ways of measuring fiscal need and the needs of communities. So first of all, we got to deal with the earmarking. State revenue sharing as a subset of that earmarking needs to be cleaned up and made meaningful. How it happens, if it's kept into the Constitution, a meaningful way to have the legislature fulfill its promises.
And another area that kind of reflects the difference between private sector and public sector, and whether or not they should more mirror each other, would be the issue of pensions, and how much we protect them, and in what form do we allow for them to evolve the way they have in the private sector. Is that something that should be revisited in a con?
Yeah, I think when we saw when Detroit declared bankruptcy and the question of public pensions were put on the table, that there was a bright spotlight shown on this element of our state constitution. The history, the backstory is that for a long time, we were able to hire civil servants at the state level or at local government level and say, we probably can't pay you the same as if you did the same job at the private sector, but we can promise you a pension upon retirement, and that'll, give you lifetime security as opposed to immediate riches. And this provision was put in the Constitution to make sure that the state and the local governments didn't renege on that promise, that they couldn't pull that out and say, we're going to cut your pension or we're going to eliminate it completely. Generally, as a society, we're moving away from the defined benefit plans to a defined contribution.
Exactly.
So this type of thing is becoming less and less significant. But at the same time, defined benefit plans do still exist in state and local government. And a promise made should be a promise kept. There's a whole discussion we don't need to get into whether these pensions were meant to be tips, sort of here's a bonus for thanking you for years of service, or some level of compensation. The point is that we've offered them and promised workers, if you devote, if you give your time and labors to us, we'll compensate you, and that word should mean something.
So as we look at this in total, and we've kind of done Article 9 top to bottom here, what is the one section or the one portion that you think would offer maybe the best opportunity to initiate better practices, less complication, less detail? Is there an area that and I realize this question is somewhat subjective, but if there was an area that just cries out for attention?
The one that cries out, and it's not a single section. We have, from the late 80s through the early 2000s, amended the Constitution several times and put in several provisions. In some cases, we all use computers these days, the idea of copy and paste. They did that with statute. Copy the statute, paste it into the Constitution. And it's literally word for word what prior existed in statute, because we wanted to make sure
hands off.
The hands off, right? So to answer your question, if you're going to start in one place to clean this up and take statutory nature out of the Constitution, that's it. But a lot of Article 9 is item 1B. There are so much issues of statutory nature in Article 9 that really prohibit our state and local governments from adapting to the times and having a finance system that reflects the 2020s, soon to be the 2030s, and how we go forward. These are the types of things that will be really hard to fix through amendment. So if we're going to clean them up, a constitutional convention is the best way to do it.
And yet the timing of it is, not taking this out of the political environment that we're in, a con would be a very difficult, contentious thing because the level of trust is so low.
The level of trust, and we are a very purple state, Republican and Democrat, and so will we be able to find 148 delegates to a constitutional convention that understand these issues enough that they can make compromises and still create a working system that we can understand and work within? So on the one hand, you can make the case that Article 9 begs for a constitutional convention and cleanup. On the other hand, tap the brakes and what are we asking for here?
Yeah. Eric, thanks so much. A really meaty look at this. And there are more elements that we didn't have time to cover, but we hit the big ones. And for those of you that want to take a closer look, do read the Article 9 paper that Eric has generated at CRC Mich. CRCMich.org. And as always, as Eric likes to say, a fact tank can't run on fumes. If you find it in your hearts, go to the CRCMich.org website and also give us a little financial help as well. As we talk about taxation, we depend on your charity.
Right,
so
yes.
We would certainly appreciate that to keep this kind of a very fact-based analysis moving forward. Eric, thanks again.
Yeah, we're in the home stretch. There's 12 articles, and this is Article 9, so we have 3 more to go, and we hope to have the final one in everyone's inbox right about the time they're receiving their absentee ballots for the November election. So stay tuned, and we got 3 more to go.
All right. Until then, take care. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Facts Matter podcast.
The Citizens Research Council of Michigan has been providing lawmakers, academics, the media, philanthropists, business leaders, voters, and all Michiganders with factual, unbiased, independent information on significant issues concerning state and local government organization and finance. For over a century, our research is available to you. Go online at crcmich.org and on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and download our research. Check out our numerous papers and blogs, and listen to our podcasts. And while you're there, please consider supporting our research with a donation. This has been a Facts Matter podcast, a presentation of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan.